World history has shown us over the years, throughout our world's history, that humanity can be very dark, very dark. Stories of brutality. There are some really great benefits to living in the modern world. One of those is that there are not as many hidden stories around the world. We hear about what's happening in Nigeria. You hear about what's happening in China, Middle East, to Christ followers. Like, news travels fast in our modern day and world. But in the ancient world, it was not like this. There were many people. One of them, Nero of Rome. Nero was known as one of the most brutal leaders in the ancient world. He killed his wife, killed his mother, because he was worried that they were going to try to usurp his authority. He lit Christians alive as human torches in Rome. You have Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of China, murdered scholars in mass executions. He burned all the books and learning material. Talk about control. More recently, you have Adolf Hitler. Over 6 million Jews had their lives taken from them because of one man's hatred. They estimate that around 20 to 30 million people were murdered by the hands of Hitler over his time of ruling and reign. The ancient world was brutal. It wasn't like you think about now, we're like, oh, I wish we didn't have this and I wish we didn't have that. But you look back towards history, there are some pretty awful things that were taking place. And we're gonna get a glimpse of that today in Mark chapter 6, where we're gonna see the brutality of the leaders of the first century world. So let's look here in Mark chapter 6, verses 14 through 29. King Herod heard of it for Jesus. Jesus' name had become known. Some said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said, he is Elijah. And others said, he is a prophet like the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and a holy man, and kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet heard him gladly. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. For when Herodias' daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he vowed to her, whatever you ask me, I will give to you, up to half of my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, for what should I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. And she came immediately with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was exceedingly sorry but because of his oaths and his guests, he did not want to break his word to her. And immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in prison. And he brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard of it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Now, there is a lot of verses in this passage, and there's a lot going on in this passage. Now, as we kind of start this morning, I want to give some clarity to what's taking place here. First and foremost, the first 6 verses of this passage, John the Baptist has already been beheaded. They're starting to hear this man named Jesus. His fame is growing in the region, and so they start to kind of call out, who is this guy named Jesus? How can he do the things that they say that he is doing? Now, verses 21 through 29, they are telling a story that had already taken place. So first 6 verses, they're talking about John the Baptist post-beheading. And now 21 through 29, what we see is them explaining how John the Baptist was executed. So if you skim through it, it can feel like a contradiction, but Mark has kind of given us the end of the story and then explains the story, if I could say it that way. Let's look at verses 14 through 16. When King Herod heard of it for Jesus' name had become known. Some said John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others, he said, he is Elijah. And others said, he is a prophet like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. Now there's an interesting choice of words here. I want you to make note of this. If you're a writer in your Bible or a highlighter, you can highlight this part where he calls Herod King Herod. King Herod. The problem with that is that Herod was not a king. Herod was a governor of the region of Galilee. In fact, he requested to become a king and was rejected by Caesar. This Herod kind of carries himself with a sense of pride, and you know those people that it's like they take their title way too seriously? Sorry, this is offensive. You know the mall cops? They can't really do anything, but they're very, very passionate about their job. Thank you, Kevin James. And so he had power, but he was not a king. He was denied to become a king. But a governor did hold quite a bit of power. And as a reminder, just remember that the story of Jesus is leading to this crescendo, this final scene, which most people think is gonna be, he's gonna rescue Jerusalem, he's gonna rescue the Israelites, and he's gonna become this powerful ruling king that's gonna free them from the power of Rome. But as we know the story, it's leading to something that throws them totally off, where this king that has come is leading towards this powerful moment of death. Not to rule and reign in the ways and the eyes of men, but to rule in the ways and the eyes of the Father. Jesus has been working really hard at keeping his identity, his full identity, kind of in the background. You hear him say things like this. He will heal somebody and he'll say, make sure that you tell no one. Go and tell no one. I mean, he's trying to keep his real full identity as Messiah hidden from the greater society. But evidently, when you raise people from the dead and you heal them from demons and bleeding, people hear about it. And so his fame starts growing. People are wrestling with who this Jesus is. They start naming prophets. Surely it's Elijah that has come back. Or maybe it's John the Baptist. Maybe he has come back to life because this doesn't make sense. There's this wrestling that is happening. And from that time until now, people are still wrestling with the idea and the person of Jesus. Was he just a good man? Was he just a wise teacher? Was he simply a prophet? Like who is this person of Jesus? Today, people wrestle with this. They wrestle with I like the idea of Jesus, but I don't know if I fully buy into everything. The inner turmoil that people have over this. C.S. Lewis famously said, Jesus, is either lunatic or Lord. I mean, to think about it, we read these stories, it's like, oh yeah, Jesus said he was the Son of God. Could you imagine being in a church on a Sunday morning and the pastor gets up and goes, guys, I have an announcement. I'm the Messiah. That kind of shock that you would have is the same kind of shock that the first century had. Like, wait a second. I don't know how to take this, but I think you're blaspheming the name of God. Everyone in this life is going to have to wrestle with who this person named Jesus is. So look at verses 17 through 20. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John, and he bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous man, holy man, and he kept him safe. And when he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, yet he heard him gladly. Herod, this leader, this governor of Galilee, has John the Baptist arrested on the account of his wife because she has this great grudge against him. Like, he's speaking powerful truths to Herod, and his wife is like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want that to be in your head. Now, here is where it really gets interesting in this story, is that Herodias is Herod's wife, but was also Herod's brother's wife. Like, this is messy. It's a really messy situation. I know some of you have some pretty jacked up families. You're gonna see them in a couple of weeks. Everybody's got the crazy uncle. Everybody's just kind of, oh, that's just Johnny. You're like, he's weird. Sorry, Johnny. I did not catch that. No one would say that about you, Johnny, I promise. Whew, can't recover from that. Herod's like, hey, I think I like my brother's wife. I'm gonna take her. Could you imagine what sitting down at the dinner table with their family was like? Herod's brother, like, so Herodias, how's life? And Herod arrested John because he was speaking truth to power. Truth to power, boldness and clarity. I mean, you think about John speaking to this governor who really holds his future in his hands, and he's saying, what you are doing is not right. Our history is full of people that have boldly proclaimed truth and stood up against power. Martin Luther King Jr. boldly proclaimed against the culture that was so evil towards people of different races. Dietrich Bonhoeffer taking a stand against Nazi Germany. People do not like it when you speak truth to power. People get uncomfortable when you speak truth to power. And for John, unfortunately, Herodias was not a fan of his speaking truth. Now, this passage is not about, it's not about some woman that is just rogue and and the application is not, hey, pay attention to your wives and like nothing like that. I want to be clear. We're not here like to downplay the role of women and the responsibilities that they share in the house with their husbands. That's not where we're going with this, but this is about the influence that you allow to happen in your life from outside forces. All of us in this room are being influenced every single day. If you want a good kiss, you have to go to Kay. Thank you. If you want to make your spouse happy, you need to buy them a brand new Lexus with a giant red bow on it. We're being influenced. What about iPhones? I'm convinced Apple is reproducing the same phone and calling it a new number and making us buy it. And they use language like, well, the camera's better. Great. And maybe if you're from my generation, you know, like any picture today is greater than what we used to have. Kids, we used to carry these little disposable cameras. And you'd have to wait to get them printed out to know if you actually did a good job of capturing anything. Whether we recognize it or not, we are being influenced. So the question becomes, who or what is having influence in your life that should not be having influence in your life? Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe it's a Maybe it's just a desire in your heart that you are allowing to influence decisions that you know you should not be making. Are you allowing outside forces to dictate your future? Because that's what's happening with Herod here. You see this wrestling that he is having with this guy named John, and he's perplexed by him. He's gladly listening to him. But he is listening to his wife, who should not be his wife, and is allowing her to dictate his future. There's a interesting line here that is written by Mark. Herod himself, wrestling with this idea of Jesus, he says that he feared him. He feared him. And that he was perplexed by this man, enjoyed listening to him. John the Baptist was like the Bible's version of the most interesting man in the world. This guy that's wearing animal clothing, living in the wilderness, eating locusts, speaking truth to power. Like, this is a man that, even of that day, is living a life so separated from the life of the culture around him that people are like, this is different. This is strange. Like, I need to know about this. And this man named John captures the heart of a ruler. But it wasn't enough. Here's a couple things in regard to what he's saying here. Fear, that he feared John because he was a holy man. Fear does not always lead to obedience. Fear does not always lead to obedience. Listen, I grew up in that generation where you lived in fear of what your parents might find out about your life. Anybody else? You know what I still did? Bad things. Just because I feared my dad doesn't mean that I wasn't gonna do something he didn't want me to do. What fear can really lead to is just compliance rather than full obedience. Some of y'all need to hear that. Fear can lead to compliance rather than full and genuine obedience. That doesn't mean we throw the fear of God out of our minds. No, the fear of God leads us to honoring and respecting who he is and what he has called us to. Yes, all of those things. But just because you fear God does not mean that you're going to obey him. John is wrestling. He feared this holy man, liked to listen to him. It just wasn't enough. And I'm afraid that this is the place that a lot of people find themselves in today. They like the idea of Jesus. They like even the teachings of Jesus. I've heard this statement in our culture over the years where it's like, I really like the person of Jesus. I just don't like the people that follow him. You ever hear that? I really like Jesus seemed like, man, he was always so loving and so generous and so kind. And they forget that he flipped tables over, right? And that he told people, go and sin no more. They like the idea of Jesus. They like his teachings, but just like John, they're interested in the truth, but they're not willing to walk in the light. I like the idea, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to fully submit. And you may be here today wrestling with the idea of Jesus. First and foremost, I would say we're glad that you're here. Not everybody in this room is a Christ follower. And that's a beautiful thing of the church, is that the outsider gets welcomed in and can be a part of the church. And the reality is that for some people, salvation comes really quickly, and for others, it's a really long road. Why is that? We don't fully know, but man, we're glad that you're here, if that's you. But I would say, in your wrestling with Jesus, you should be seeking out and wanting to know who the real person in the work of Jesus is and what he calls you to. Look at verse 21 through 23. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. For when Herodias' daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he vowed to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, up to half of my kingdom. So Herod gathers all these dignitaries, military leaders, important people in the city. This would have been the party of all parties. Like we have this new neighbor behind us. I haven't met him yet. I don't know if I want to. Every night, he plays music so loud. It's not you, Cody. He plays music so loud, and he's like singing at the top of my lungs. I'm assuming alcohol-induced singing, because that's what it sounds like. He's having a party by himself back there every day. I'm like, don't you have a job or responsibilities? Go to sleep. This party that Herod threw, wine would be flowing freely, people's decision-making not at its highest point. And he has his stepdaughter come in and dances for the people. Now, we can just kind of skip over that and think, like, oh, she came in and did like Genghis Khan or something. No. Like this, all the young people, thank you for catching that. This dance would have been a very sensual dance. This is not like, hey, could you do a line dance for us? No, she's doing a sensual dance. In most cases, these dances for these parties were done by prostitutes or professional dancers. So I want to stop for a moment. I want you to think of the scene that we are watching play out before us in the Gospel of Mark. Herod and his wife throw this big party. Herod's stepdaughter is dancing sensually for the people in the party. He puts his stepdaughter on display for all of the people. And here's the sick part. It pleases Herod and his guests. So much so that Herod makes a ridiculous promise. I'll give you up to half of my kingdom. What's so interesting about that is that Herod had no kingdom to even give to her. Herod was not king, he was a governor. He had no authority or responsibility to be able to say, hey, you want half my kingdom, have it. I imagine Caesar would be in Rome like, not happening. But he makes this promise to her out of this sinful situation. It's out of pride, it's all for show. And I think this is something that we really need to pay attention to in our world, in our day, especially our time, is that sin is never meaningless. Sin is never meaningless. Sin will always take you farther than you wanted to go. Do you think Herod, in his dreams about his future and his life, was thinking, I hope one day I make a drunken promise to my stepdaughter to give half my kingdom away? No, sin will take you farther than you wanted. My grandfather used to say it this way, is that sin will take you farther than you wanted to go, keep you longer than you wanted to stay, and cost you more than you wanted to pay. John Owen famously said it this way, be killing sin or sin will be killing you. Herod found this out the hard way. Does this mean that as followers of Jesus, the expectation for you is for you to live a perfect life? No. Does this mean that Jesus has this expectation that you're going to make every right decision? Of course not. Jesus knows the brokenness of your heart. He knows that the heart is prone to wander. That is what grace is for. That Jesus pours out freely, but what it should do is cause us to pause and to just sit for a moment and say, is there anything in my life that I need to get rid of, this sin that I've kind of held around and kept as a little pet? And eventually that little pet turns into this giant monster that will eventually eat us alive. Are we willing to take an inventory of our lives to say, what is in my heart? What is in my life? And I'm not talking about just taking out these big ideas. I'm talking letting the Lord go down into the roots of your heart and pull those evil things out. Let's look at the rest of this passage, 24 through 29. And she went out and said to her mother, "For what should I ask?" And she said, "The head of John the Baptist." And she came in immediately with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oath to his guest, he did not want to break his word to her. And immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in prison, brought the head back on the platter, gave it to the girl. And the girl gave it to her mother. Notice that. The girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard of it, they came and they took the body of John and laid it in a tomb. The mother, Herod's wife, still scheming, puts her daughter on display for all of these sinful men. Again, living this life of sin keeps growing and growing and growing until you can't control it anymore. And Herod knows that he has been trapped. He's in a lose-lose situation. Mark writes this in such a fascinating way. He says it this way: he was exceedingly sorry. Now, I don't know, I'm inferring this. The scriptures don't give us this, but I wonder if that sorry was more of a, I'm sorry, but I'm not really sorry. Because if I was really sorry, then I probably wouldn't have done it in the first place. He's in this lose-lose situation. Dishonor his promise or honor it. If he honors it, John loses his head. He loses his life. If he dishonors it, he breaks a promise to all these people which he's trying to project power and authority to. And this is what sin is. It's a lose-lose situation. It always over-promises and under-delivers. Many lives and families have been wrecked by the over-promising of sin, that you are going to be fulfilled. If you act on this temptation, like you're gonna live your best life ever if you act on this temptation. And the reality is, all it does is leave a wake of destruction for the people around them. You know, we've talked a lot about sin this morning, the effects of sin. And I think it's something that we have to pay attention to. And what's amazing to me is how far that we will go in our humanity to search after sin, to run after sin. I was hearing a story of a pastor. I was on a retreat this last week in Brady, Texas, Central Texas. And one of the pastors was talking about another pastor that had a large public moral failure. And he explained, he said, I wasn't as surprised about the sin as I was how far this person went to commit the sin. And he explained, like, this person had to get on this train and that bus, and he had to go to this city and he had to go to that city. I mean, it was like hours worth of work to get to this one area so this pastor could be involved in this sin. And we can be the same way. We will organize our life in such a way that we're making all these roads and turns, and finally we realize we've come to the end of ourselves, like, what am I even doing? So yes, sin is a lot about what this passage, what I really believe this passage is about, is it is about discipleship. Discipleship. A word that we know, a word that many don't take to heart. The call of the discipleship, the life of following Jesus. And I want to explain here for a moment, because what I mean by that is this, is that a life of following Jesus is a life that leads to death. I don't think you're gonna find that very many times on like Christian authors in the Christian bookstores. You're not gonna find that one. Follow Jesus, it leads to death. How many are picking up that title? No, we want the like 5 steps to a better marriage. That's the things that we long for, but the reality is the life of following Jesus is a life that leads to death. For many across our globe, it's a life that looks a lot like John's, where they lose their very life for the sake of Christ and the kingdom, where they stand firm in their faith, even in the face of death. We've been hearing a lot about what's happening in Nigeria. I have a friend of mine that is a missionary in Vietnam, and he pastors up in these mountains. And they have church service and they have lookouts all around. And when the police start to come around the town, these people in this church have to run into the hills to hide for about 30 minutes. And then they come back down and then they continue church. Because if they get found out, they're going to be arrested. This is a life that many people have to live. 12 Christians a day are killed for their life, for their faith. 12 Christians globally are killed. The number is greater when you include Christians that are murdered, but I'm talking like actual faith martyrs. It can be a reality, but for a lot of us, most likely, in America, you're not gonna have to lay your life down for your faith. I don't see it happening. So what is a life of following Jesus that leads to death? What does that look like for you and me? It's not gonna be physical death, but it is a call to die to ourselves. Look at what Andrew Murray said. The surrender of self is the open door to the faithfulness of God's power and life. The surrender of self is the open door to the fullness of God's power and life. Surrender. Die to yourself so that you can live in Christ. You may have come in here this morning and you're like, I just needed a really encouraging message today. I'm sorry you're not getting it. Die to yourself. What does that look like to die to yourself? Because this is not just a theory, but it's applicable to your life. Just a couple real intangible things. Putting others first. Putting others first. We're a pretty selfish society, aren't we? Anybody agree with that? It takes a lot to die to yourself and put others first. Have you ever been the person at Aldi? You've got 2 things in your hand, and the person has a giant basket in front of you, and they got to pack their own groceries for some reason. If you can't tell, I don't like Aldi. It's quite infuriating, actually. And that person turns around and looks at you and they're just like, hey. And you're like, you could have said, go ahead. That'd be the godly thing to do. Putting others first. What does that look like in your life and in your context? We live in such a time where everybody's in such a hurry that evidently everybody's life is so important that it can't be interrupted by anything else. We drive like it. I've turned into an old man at intersections. Somebody runs a yellow light and I'm like, could you believe that? Here's another one, letting go of control of your life. This one's a little bit harder, isn't it? It's harder for those that are actually realize their control that they try to orchestrate in their life. Submitting your desires and plans to the Lord. Another one, that's how you die to self. What if God calls you to do something that you're like, I don't know if I can do that? You know how to say to that? Good. Because the Lord calls us to things that we don't feel that we are either equipped for or that we're right for, but he calls you to it so that you will live a life of dependence upon him. But we live so comfortably in our world and in our culture that we think, oh, I can't do that. It's a little reckless. And I'm not telling you to live don't go to your job and quit on Monday morning. Have a plan. Yes, but live in full dependence on him. Submit your desires and your will to the Lord. It's a life that says, I am not my own. I have been bought with a price. So I live it for Jesus and his glory. Matthew chapter 16, verse 25. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But for whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. We try to orchestrate the things in our life to try to get the most out of life. Live life to the fullest. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with living life to the fullest. I'm not saying you have to live a boring life. But what Jesus offers us, he says, if you will die to yourself, I will give you life abundantly, more than you could ever imagine in this world. He's giving it to us. And yet we stay on the other side and we're like, I think we're good over here. I like the life that I have. He offers abundant life, rich intimacy with him. And he invites us, come. Starts with dying to yourself, not being addicted to pleasure. Lose your life so you can gain life in him. I want you to bow your heads with me.